In the comics, Marvel has a long history of creating alternate storylines in which events we know play out just a little differently. Like what if the Punisher became an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., someone else became Spider-Man, or if Wolverine had killed the Hulk. So while Doctor Strange saw 14,605 futures, for the sake of this video, let's imagine that there was a 14,606th one, and Steve Rogers sacrificed himself in Avengers Endgame instead of Tony Stark. I'm Greg Elliott, and here's how Endgame's ending would be different if Captain America did the snap. Okay, well, first off, this means that Endgame's final battle would have had to go quite a bit differently. Cap didn't have that fancy Iron Man nanotech armor that could duplicate the Infinity Gauntlet, so he would have had to A, keep the original gauntlet away from Thanos, and then B, come to realize at some point that another snap was the only way to stop him. Yes, that's significantly more complicated, which is a good reason why they didn't do it that way. But in this imaginary scenario, the first big question we have is, would Captain America have even been able to survive the snap? So, there are two factors to consider here. One, the sheer amount of energy consumed by using the Infinity Stones, and two, Steve Rogers' superhuman metabolism. In regards to the first, consider that the final snap was much more limited in scope than previous ones. Thanos and Hulk both affected the entire universe, whereas this snap just erased Thanos and his army. Thanos and Hulk were both badly scarred by using the gauntlet, but in this case, the impact potentially wouldn't have been as severe. But even so, Steve probably wouldn't have survived. Even if the energy levels with this snap were significantly lower, even a super soldier's body can only withstand so much. In Guardians of the Galaxy, the only way Star-Lord survived holding just the Power Stone is because he's half celestial, and Tony only lasted long enough to say his final goodbyes because of his armor. So without that, Steve Rogers would most likely have been killed instantly. Which brings us then to what would have happened to Tony if he'd survived. A much happier ending, most likely. He would have gone home and spent the rest of his life with Pepper and Morgan, right? You know, he'd still have been around, probably funding the Avengers and doing Zoom calls with Peter Parker, but his time as Iron Man would probably have been done. But Spider-Man Far From Home made it quite clear that Tony had pissed off a lot of people over the years, and some of them had access to Stark tech. If Tony realized his old technology was being used, he'd have to put on the suit again to try and stop it, right? Kinda like the Armor Wars comics where he finds out his tech was being used by criminals, so he decides to do whatever it takes to get it back or destroy it. But all said and done, Endgame's ending just wouldn't be as good if Captain America did the snap. Endgame's plot is deliberately constructed to close the book on Tony Stark. He gets a taste of his happily ever after with Pepper and Morgan, he spends some quality time with his dad thanks to time travel, and he finally sacrifices himself for the ones he loves, tying it all back to the first Avengers when Steve questions if Tony could ever be the guy to make the sacrifice play. Everything is neatly tied up, which makes Tony's death the only real appropriate end to the story. And interestingly, Endgame kind of flips the script for Steve. Captain America gave everything he had to save the world multiple times, and at the end of Endgame, for the first time in his life, he doesn't choose the path of sacrifice and goes back in time to live his own happily ever after. So, while it might have been cool to see Cap have that final moment against Thanos, it's definitely no I am Iron Man. The new What If show on Disney Plus is going to give us a bunch of alternate takes on well-known MCU events, but we're pretty sure that this is one that they won't mess with. So, what do you think? Would snapping Steve have been worthwhile? Let us know in the comments and keep coming back to Screen Rant to stay in the loop on all things Marvel. I'm Greg Elliott, and I'll see you around. Peace.